Mainstay, coach Lisa Alexander at the Diamonds squad camp. Credit. Sithic Haven Alexander took charge of the Diamonds in 2011 and has guided them to Commonwealth Games gold and silver, as well as a World Championship gold and World Cup victory. Alexander took what was already a hugely successful side and helped them become not only a standard-bearer for on-court success but fostered a culture that has seen them become one of Australia's most admired national sporting sides. Alexander is a complete professional dedicated to her players but being able to expertly draw the line when hard calls need to be made. Lynn Anderson, Australian Paralympic Committee Chief Executive, Canterbury Bulldogs Chair, former Managing Director of Repucum for Australia and New Zealand, is now the CEO of the Australian Paralympic Committee. She is also the chair of the Canterbury Bulldogs after her ticket swept to power at the last football club elections. Ashleigh Barty, tennis player inspiring Australia's Ashleigh Barty in the Fed Cup against the US. Credit. Eighth country's only player, man or woman, ranked inside the world's top 20, the diminutive Queenslander is an inspiring figure who most recently reached the Australian Open quarter-finals. Caitlin Bassett, Australian netball captain for Diamonds shooter, will spearhead the national team in their bid to defend their World Cup title in Liverpool this year. Stephanie Beltrame, Executive General Manager, Broadcasting and Commercial, Cricket Australia. Rising television rights deals have underpinned cricket's revenue growth, and Beltrame has been a key figure in making the deals behind the scenes. Charlotte Brigel, Vice President, Head of Sales and Operations, IMG Media Australia. Brigel has worked on big-money broadcast rights deals across the industry, including the Rugby World Cup, Rugby League World Cup, Wimbledon, the British Open and MotoGP. Ali Brigg Inshaw, NRLW player, Brisbane halfback, guided her side to the inaugural NRLW crown and was Player of the Match for Australia in her side's 2017 Women's World Cup final. Liz Cambage, basketball player, centre, is one of Australia's greatest basketball exports, playing for Dallas in the WNBA and a fixture for national side the Opals. Outspoken and passionate, Cambage will be key to Australian hopes at the Tokyo Games in 2020. Kate Campbell, swimmer, freestyle sprint great, has soared after her dramas in Rio, returning to the pool better than ever and becoming an influential voice for women in sport and athlete rights and welfare. Charlotte Caslick, rugby player, one of the most recognisable faces in Australian women's rugby. Caslick's gold medal-winning performance in the Rio Olympics in 2016 spawned 1,000 braids. A broken finger has kept her off the field this season, but Australia's medal hopes in Tokyo next year could depend on her game-breaking presence in the team. Raelene Castle, Rugby Australia Chief Executive, the first woman to run one of Australia's major football codes. Castle was appointed Rugby Australia Chief Executive at the end of 2017, one of the most damaging years in the game. Since taking over from predecessor Bill Pulver, Castle has demonstrated a pragmatic approach to sports administration, navigating crises such as Israel Folau's anti-gay comments and the Wallabies' worst season on record, which ended in major reforms to Rugby Australia's high-performance coaching model, including the reintroduction of a director of rugby role and a panel of test selectors. Facing a major challenge, Raelene Castle. Credit. Stephen Seward, a former chief executive of the Canterbury Bulldogs and Netball New Zealand, she now faces a major challenge in delivering an improved broadcast deal for Super Rugby and the Rugby Championship in a difficult domestic environment and softer international market. Brokering the deal will require her to navigate the notoriously competitive Australian winter sports market, and broadcasters continued skepticism about the breadth of rugby's appeal, but also the treacherous world of international rugby politics. A newcomer to the World Rugby Boys Club, Castle was not able to win over council members, who voted for New Zealand to win the hosting rights of the 2021 Women's Rugby World Cup despite Australia having what was generally regarded as the superior bid. She will have more time to navigate the landscape and mount a case for Australia's bid for the 2027 Men's Rugby World Cup, but before then she must lead the formation of an Australian position on the future of Super Rugby, under growing pressure to put Australia's interests first. She will also be responsible for appointing a successor to Wallabies coach Michael Cheika, who has signalled he will step down whether or not Australia win this year's Rugby World Cup. A Minerva Network member, Castle mentors Australian cricketer Alyssa Healy. Kitty Chiller, Gymnastic Australia chief and AOC member. Chiller was the Australian chef de mission at a tumultuous Games in Rio in 2016 and now sits on the AOC board as well as juggling roles as the CEO of Gymnastics Australia and president of Modern Pentathlon Australia. Belinda Clark, acting executive general manager, team performance, Cricket Australia. A legend in the sport as a player, Clark replaced Pat Howard last November and is overseeing the appointment of his successor before reverting to her preferred role as executive general manager of community cricket. Kate Cohen, FFA analyst and of the sharpest young minds in Australian football, Cohen swiftly rose from a blogger to one of the key football analysts for Australia's national teams. Such was the strength and depth of her tactical analyses in articles published in Leopold Method and on Fox Sports. Cohen caught the attention of the likes of Ange Postecoglou and Alan Stachcich and became an analyst for the young Matildas before becoming the senior teams analyst and the Socceroos scout. Megan Davis, Australian Rugby League Commission member and a nod to her standing in the business and sporting communities, Professor Megan Davis was named the Australian Financial Review's most influential woman last October. Davis is currently the Pro-Vice-Chancellor at UNSW and Acting Commissioner of the New South Wales Land and Environment Court, as well as a member of the New South Wales Sentencing Council. She has served a lengthy diplomatic career in the United Nations, the first Australian Aboriginal woman to serve on the body. Those skills have come in handy in her latest role, as a member of the ARL Commission. Professor Megan Davis was named the Australian Financial Review's most influential woman last October. Peter Breakshaw is currently undertaking a review into the NRL's culture and the way the code treats and relates to women. An admitted solicitor of the Supreme Court of the Australian Capital Territory and Fellow of the Australian Academy of Law, she is talking to all key rugby league stakeholders as part of the project. ARL Commission Chairman Peter Beattie has identified Davis as a potential replacement when he steps down from the role. An expert in constitutional law, Davis was honoured for her role in the process that culminated in the historic Uluru Statement from the Heart. In a further nod to her work in the Indigenous community, she made the list for NITV's 20 Inspiring Black Women Who Changed Australia. She is a Cobble Aboriginal woman from the Barungam Nation in southwest Queensland. Amanda Elliott, Victoria Racing Club Chair. Elliott became the first female chair of the Victoria Racing Club in 2017 after joining the board of directors of the home of the Melbourne Cup in 2002. She has been a driving force behind the build of the club stand at Flemington and leads the way in racing in Victoria. Driving force, Amanda Elliott, the first woman to lead the VRC in its 153-year history. Credit: Christopher Paulson. Maren Fechner, Netball Australia Chief Executive. After moving through various administrative roles in netball, successfully spearheading its commercial push, Fechner now sits as CEO of Netball Australia and is overseeing the sustainable expansion of the sport. Margot Foster, Senior IAAF figure. Former Olympic rower, is chair of the IAAF panel that oversees elections for Athletics World governing body, is the Confederation of Australian Motorsport Director and runs the popular Women of Sport lunches. Jessica Fox, kayak and canoe star. Best ever, Jessica Fox. Credit: Apt's most successful female paddler in history after winning 2 world crowns at the Canoe Slalom World Championships in Rio de Janeiro last year. Stephanie Gilmore, surfer world beater. Stephanie Gilmore. Credit: Dallas Kilponena, 7-time world champion. Gilmore is the #1 ranked women's surfer in the world. The 31-year-old won her first world crown in 2007 as a rookie, the first woman or man to do so, and has dominated the sport since. Alyssa Healy, cricketer. Healy has established herself as one of the best wicket-keepers in world cricket. She was named player of the tournament at the recent T20 World Cup and has played at the top level for almost a decade. Top of her craft, Alyssa Healy. Credit: Emma Highwood, FFA head of women's football, the most senior female administrator in Australian football, currently with one of the most diverse portfolios. Highwood is Football Federation Australia's head of women's football, community football and football development and, according to internal sources, is tipped for a bigger role in the future. She hasn't been far from controversy, however, and may have to answer questions around the handling of the Alan Stachcich sacking in a looming board-sanctioned review into the incident. Jane H.R. Delicka, Tennis Australia chair, CEO of A2 Milk, is the first woman to lead the board of TAI, whose most prized asset, the Australian Open, last year made a landmark switch to Channel 9. Sam Kerr, Matilda's captain. Some say the market doesn't lie. If that's the case, then the fact Sam Kerr is on the cusp of landing the first $1 million pay packet speaks in volumes about the stature of arguably the biggest name in Australian football. The Matildas star became the first female marquee player in 2018 when she signed a $400,000 contract with Football Federation Australia to remain in the W League with Perth Glory. Football superstar, Sam Kerr. Credit: Louise Kennelich is on a lucrative wicket in USA with Chicago Red Stars and is set to become the face of Nike Australia, ahead of the likes of NBA All-Star Ben Simmons, golfer Jason Day and tennis star Nick Kyrgios. Kerr is not just considered the best footballer in Australia but one of the world's best female players. For the past 2 years, nobody has scored more goals than her in any of the domestic leagues Kerr has played in. She was crowned Asia's Best in 2017, Young Australian of the Year in 2018 and is on course to achieve even higher honours in 2019 with the upcoming Women's World Cup in France. She's just been handed the captain's armband for that tournament where she will lead Australia in the country's greatest ever chance to claim a podium position at World Cup. Minjee Lee, golfer on the rise. Minjee Lee. Credit: Apt's daughter of South Korean immigrants, Lee is already number 3 in the world at just 22, by far Australia's best since Carrie Webb, and perhaps headed for number 1. Amanda Lang, ARL Commissioner Foxtel consultant, was one of the architects behind the NRL's last billion-dollar broadcast in her previous role as managing director of Nine. She is currently on the ARL Commission and is also an Sport Australia director. Nicole Livingstone, AFL head of women's football. Key voice, Nicole Livingstone. Credit: Christopher Paulson, the former Olympic swimmer, turned to broadcast commentary after retirement, but has most recently made an impact as a key voice championing women's football as an AFL administrator. Pip Marlow, Rugby Australia executive, Rugby Australia board member and Suncorp chief executive of customer marketplace at insurance and banking. Was Microsoft Australia managing director. Christina Matthews, WACA chief executive, was instrumental in the game's shifting of matches to the new Optus Stadium and was a contender for the top job at Cricket Australia when James Sutherland departed last year. Bridget McKenzie, Senator Bridget McKenzie outside Parliament House. Credit. Andrew Mearsh has been a senator for the National Party since 2011 and the federal sports minister since 2017. McKenzie unveiled the National Sports Plan in 2018 that included changing the Australian Sports Commission to a broader body known as Sports Australia. Sam Mostyn, Sydney Swans director and of the main advocates behind the creation of AFLW, Mostyn served on the AFL Commission for more than a decade and in 2017 became a director of the Sydney Swans. Christine McLoughlin, Venues New South Wales Chairman Stadium Overseer, Christine McLoughlin. Credit. Louise Kennelly, Chairman of Venues New South Wales, which controls ANZ Stadium and the new Bankwest Stadium in Parramatta. McLoughlin is also co-founder and chair of the Minerva Network, a mentoring program that brings together Australian businesswomen and elite women athletes. Karen Murphy, NRL Integrity Unit Head, former detective, is one of the most powerful figures in rugby league as the head of the NRL's Integrity Unit. A former Jillaroo, the medal presented to the player of the match in the NRLW Grand Final has been named after her. Peggy O'Neill, Richmond chair, first elected to the Richmond board in 2005, she became the first woman to serve as president of an AFL club in 2013. 4 years later, they won the flag for the first time in 37 years. Katie Page, NRL Director History Maker, Katie Page. Credit. AAPTHE Harvey Norman, CEO, made history in 2005 when appointed to the board of the NRL, the first woman to become a director of a major sporting board in Australia. Page is also the boss of the Magic Millions. Kate Palmer, Sports Australia CEO Leader, Sport Australia CEO Kate Palmer. Credit. Dion Georgopoulos, a former leading netball administrator, Palmer is now the chief executive of Sports Australia, becoming the first woman to take over the role when appointed in 2016. Palmer leads the government's key body in distributing funds and shaping strategic sports plans from grassroots to high performance. Daisy Pearce, AFLW Player Decade of Dominance, Daisy Pearce. Credit. Pearce was so dominant a player over 12 years in the VFLW that she demanded every football fan pay attention. When the AFLW launched in 2017, she was a natural face of the league. Sally Pearson, track athlete tying another Olympic tilt, Sally Pearson. Credit. Apth Queenslander is one of Australia's greatest track athletes, taking silver in the 100 metres hurdles in 2008 before gold in London 4 years later. She hopes to compete at Tokyo 2020. Ellyse Perry, cricketer, one of Australia's most recognisable athletes, Perry burst onto the scene as a 16-year-old, debuting for her country in cricket and football. She was the youngest player to ever represent Australia in cricket, having done so before playing for her state, and was the first Australian to feature in both cricket and football World Cups. Perry became the first woman to play against men in 117 years of Sydney grade cricket, taking 2-14 against Blacktown in a Poitevin Grey under-21 match in 2010. She was a key figure in Australia's 3 consecutive T20 World Cup victories 2010, 2012 and 2014, and continued to stamp herself as one of the greatest cricketers in the world. Dominant, Ellyse Perry has been delivering in all forms of the game. Credit. Dominic Lorimer, after 18 matches for the Matildas, Perry's football career was cut short in 2014 after deciding she could not devote all her attention to the round ball game. That is not to say she loved football any less, but putting all her effort into cricket was a blessing in disguise. Perry claimed Player of the Series honours in the 2015 Women's Ashes in England after compiling the most runs and snaring the most wickets. In 2017, Perry chalked up 213 not out against England, the highest individual score by an Australian in women's tests. In last year's T20 World Cup, Perry played her 100th game as Australia once again lifted the trophy. At domestic level, Perry's stature only continues to grow. In the most recent WBBL season, the 28-year-old scored a staggering 777 runs at an average of 86.33 that featured 206 half-centuries. Gerald Rector, Basketball Australia Corkter, an experienced executive in health, was appointed as Chief Executive of Basketball Australia in February. She takes charge of a sport on a huge upward trend with a resurgent National League and potent national sides. Danny Roche, Sports Australia executive. Former Hockeyroos, Danny Roche, who challenged John Coates for the AOC presidency. Credit: Justin McMahon, USA. Former Hockeyroos who was part of the 1996 team that won gold in Atlanta. Roche is a successful businesswoman and sits on the board of Sports Australia and the St Kilda Football Club. Shook up the Australian Olympic Committee with a challenge to longtime Supremo John Coates in 2017. Lee Russell, Swimming Australia Chief Executive after vast experience. Netball Victoria, Cricket Australia and a number of AFL clubs, Russell was last year appointed the Chief Executive of Swimming Australia. She is the first female CEO of our top Olympic sport. Anne Sherry, Rugby Australia Director once touted as a future Rugby Australia chairwoman, the executive chair of Carnival Australia is now widely expected to step down from the board to pursue a top corporate role. Steady hand through some of rugby's recent turmoil. Josephine Sukkar, Rugby Australia executive. Rugby power broker, Josephine Sukkar. Credit: James Brickwood, co-founder of construction company Buildcorp. Josephine Sukkar sits on the Rugby Australia Board Nominations Committee, is president of Australian Women's Rugby and a director of the Australian Rugby Foundation. Gabrielle Traynor, AFL Commissioner. Heavy lifting, AFL Commissioner Gabrielle Traynor. Credit: AFL Media Foundation GWS Giants Director and an AFL Commissioner since 2016, Traynor did much of the heavy lifting in New South Wales and the ACT in supporting women's AFL long before it came into public vogue. Guy Waterhouse, horse trainer. Guy Waterhouse has born into racing royalty but has taken the male-dominant sport by storm since getting her licence in 1992. She took over her legendary father's Tulloch Lodge and arguably has been more successful than him. Racing royalty, Guy Waterhouse. Credit: AAPSHE is known as the First Lady Racing and its most recognizable face. She has trained 139 Group 1 winners, including a Melbourne Cup winner in Fiorente and a record 6 Golden Slipper winners. She is in the Australian Racing Hall of Fame and Sport Australia Hall of Fame. Caroline Wilson, journalist. Walkley Award winner Caroline Wilson. Credit: James Brickwood, chief football writer for The Age for nearly 2 decades. Caro is a Walkley Award-winning journalist whose opinions and reports have long held sway within the game's corridors of power. Melanie Woosnam, Hockey Australia President. Woosnam is a former Hockeyroos that now presides over Hockey Australia, one of our most competitive Olympic disciplines. She has also been on the board of Stadiums Queensland. Lucy Zellick, journalist and of the present-day Faces of Football on SBS. Lucy Zellick has not just become an icon of football in Australia but of women's sport. Face of Football, Lucy Zellick. Credit: SBSTH, a younger sister of Socceroo Nedzelic. She's been the presenter of the World Game and SBS Sport for the past 6 years, covering the 2014 and 2018 World Cups, the English Premier League, UEFA Champions League, A-League, Socceroos and Matilda's games. List compiled by Chris Barrett, Dominic Bossi, Natassia Chrysanthos, Tom Decent, Phil Lutton, Adrian Prozenko, Georgina Robinson, Chris Roots and Vince Rugari. International Women's Day.